Chapter 1. The shadow over Thistlebank School. The dawn wind carried a cold promise as Miss Marple stepped from the station carriage onto the gravel forecourt of Thistlebank School. Pale sunlight glanced off the dew-slicked windows of the venerable brick buildings, tall rectangular wings linked by narrow corridors, all topped by steep slate roofs. The institution sat on an incline overlooking the Somerset Vale, its red chimneys belching thin plumes of smoke into a sky that threatened rain. A handful of early riser school staff, a lone groundskeeper, moved about the property with clipped purpose. But an undercurrent of unease hummed beneath the hush. Miss Marple adjusted her knitted shawl to shield against the chill. She had been summoned by a letter bearing the crest of Somerset County Council. Your insights into delicate matters of character and circumstance would be invaluable. It was professionally phrased, yet carried the weight of worry. The headmistress, she learned in passing, had requested an experienced observer to visit at once. There were rumors, too many to dismiss, of discord, of secrets uncovered. And now, something darker, a tragedy, as she advanced up the wide stone steps toward the main entrance. The oak door swung open. Headmistress Eleanor Bathurst stood framed in the dim lobby. Tall, austere, with silver hair pinned in a tight coil, she looked every inch the stern educator. Yet the tremor in her hand as she offered Miss Marple a stiff handshake betrayed her nervousness. "Thank you for coming, Miss Marple," she said, voice measured but strained. "I fear the situation here has spiraled beyond our control." Miss Marple inclined her head and smiled with gentle sympathy. "Please, call me Jane. I understand this must be difficult. Perhaps you will tell me what has happened thus far." The headmistress led her into the head study, a paneled room with rows of books, the faded seal of Thistlebank School embossed on leather spines. On a side table stood a tray of tea and biscuits. The kettle still hissed. Miss Marple settled into a high-backed chair while Eleanor poured tea with trembling hands. It began, as such things often do, with a discovery, Eleanor said, setting down the teapot. "Miss Caldwell, the art mistress, found it early yesterday morning in the painting studio." Miss Marple sipped her tea, nodding. "And the body of Olive Fenwick," the headmistress whispered, staring into her cup as if the pattern of tea leaves might explain all. "She was one of our most promising girls, fourth form. Found at dawn, draped over the easel. Her neck was broken." A small gasp escaped Miss Marple's lips. "How horrifying! And the police?" "They arrived at once. Inspector Harrow from Taunton. I am told that they have interviewed most of the staff and pupils, but the more questions they ask, the more secrets seem to surface. Disappearances of letters, locked boxes of drawings, whispered rumors of an illicit romance. Tensions have been rising for weeks, and now this." Miss Marple placed her cup aside. "I shall speak with Inspector Harrow. In the meantime, perhaps you might take me to the painting studio." Study door creaked and opened. Inspector Harrow, tall and lean, entered with a fold of papers in his hand. He paused at sight of Miss Marple, but bowed politely. "Miss Marple, I take it. Inspector Harrow, Somerset Constabulary. I understand you have some expertise in unusual deaths." Miss Marple offered a serene nod. "I have a knack for observing human nature when circumstances are strained. I hear this case has many strands." Harrow laid out photographs of the painting studio. The room was spacious, lit by a bank of north-facing windows. Easels stood at oblique angles. Jars of brushes and tubes of oil paint lined shelves. The floor bore smudges of paint in every hue. At the center, the body of Olive Fenwick collapsed forward, quay dress soaked with the drying stain of dark berry, quay shades that had led the police to suspect poisoned wine, but the broken neck rendered that theory moot. Harrow tapped the image with a gloved finger. No signs of foul struggle, no footmarks beyond the body. The window was latched. It seemed she was caught at just the wrong moment. Miss Marple folded her hands. "Tell me about Olive Fenwick. What sort of girl was she?" "Bright," Harrow replied. "Well regarded by teachers, popular, yet reserved. Her paintings were exceptional, particularly those inspired by the surrounding countryside. Recently, though, she became secretive." Miss Marple considered this. Change of behavior often heralds hidden troubles. "Might you show me her work? Perhaps the content of her art offers clues." Inspector Harrow produced a slender folder. He flipped it open. A series of landscape sketches emerged. Rolling hills, gnarled oak trees, and flowers of startling vividness. Then a new motif, a tall, dark figure in silhouette, a lone person beneath a willow. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Excellent work," she said. "But that figure, could it be a self-portrait or representation of someone else?" Harrow shrugged. "No one knows. She never spoke of it. But that drawing appeared only in the past fortnight." Miss Marple made a note in her leather-bound notebook. "Figure appeared recently. Symbolism?" Beneath it, a second entry. "Olive Fenwick secretive, isolated. May I see the studio?" she asked, finally. They walked down the corridor, past classroom doors bearing hand-lettered signs. English, French, geometry. The corridors smelled of chalk dust and polished wood. A hush hung over the campus, broken only by distant voices of girls arriving for breakfast. The painting studio's door was unlocked. Inside, the scent of linseed oil mingled with the faint sweetness of spilled blackberry. Eleanor Bathurst had mentioned the jars of wild jam that Olive made for school events. The studio floor was scuffed and discolored in places. An easel stood at dead center, its canvas blank, but for a smear of paint, perhaps the remnants of a recent project. Miss Marple crouched to inspect the floor. These smudges in bright cadmium. Are they from the tubes, or something else? Harrow knelt beside her. "Those are from her paint tubes. We've tested them. Look here." He pointed to a smear of darker pigment, almost black. "This I don't recognize." Miss Marple dabbed at it gently with her shawl. The pigment tasted metallic and astringent. "This is not paint. It's iron oxide mixed with something. Organic. Could be blood mixed with soil." "A tidy observation," Harrow said. "But there's no shattered flower pot or soil nearby." Miss Marple rose and walked to the window. Through the class, she saw the sprawling lawn and, in a distant corner, a circle of wildflowers cultivated by Olive. An idea struck her. "Inspector, might we examine the garden?" Harrow raised an eyebrow. "In the rain? It will do no harm." She opened the window and stepped out, Harrow following. The grass was wet beneath their shoes. They made their way to the circle of blossoms, bluebells, foxgloves, rosehips, each chosen for their autumnal bloom. At the edge stood a broken stone sundial. Its gnomon snapped. Miss Marple crouched to inspect the base. A thin scratch marked its surface. She tapped the stone. It's hollow beneath the foundation. She brushed away a clump of earth and found a small metal tin, rusted at the seam. She pried it open and retrieved a folded scrap of paper. Unfolding it, revealed hastily scrawled lines. "Meet me at the Willow. Midnight. Just the two of us." Harrow whistled softly. Olive's midnight meeting. The Willow drawing now makes sense. Miss Marple tucked the note in her notebook. So our young artist was corresponding secretly and under the very watch of the school grounds. Someone knew to meet her at an isolated spot, and someone wanted to hide that from the world. Thunder rumbled overhead. Harrow pointed skyward. "I'd say we return inside before we're drenched." As they retreated to the studio, Miss Marple regarded the broken sundial. "A sundial marks the passage of time, Inspector. Symbolic, perhaps, of a rendezvous regulated by the clock. But this one lies shattered, time broken. A life cut short." Harrow frowned. "Your deductions are swift." Miss Marple smiled enigmatically. It is often in the small details, the broken things, that the greatest truths revealed themselves. They re-entered the studio, and Miss Marple paused in the doorway. Her keen blue eyes traveled over the easels, the shelves, the jars of pigment. Somewhere amidst the art supplies and whispered confidences lay the key to Olive Phoenix's fate. She intended to find it. Outside, rain began to drum against the glass within Thistlebank School. A darker story had only just begun to unfold. Chapter 2. Whispers in the corridors, the punishing patter of rain drummed relentlessly against the studio windows, long after Inspector Harrow and Miss Marple had retreated. Inside, over cups of strong tea, warmed by the steady glow of an oil lamp, the two conferred over the newly discovered scrap of paper. Yet, even as steam curled from their cups, the air in the painting studio felt charged with insane atmosphere, thick with questions unanswered and secrets half buried. Miss Marple traced the jagged edges of the note once more. "Midnight, at the Willow," she murmured, as though testing the phrase on her tongue. Olive Fenwick clearly arranged a clandestine meeting. But with whom? And why? She looked up at Inspector Harrow. "We must discover the identity of her correspondent." Harrow tapped the folder of sketches. "First, I intend to interview Miss Caldwell, the art mistress. She discovered the body. She may know more about Olive's recent behavior or acquaintances." Miss Marple nodded. "I will accompany you. 2 pairs of eyes and ears are better than 1. They left the damp claustrophobia of the studio behind and made their way through the corridors toward the staff wing. The hall was empty now. Between morning roll call and the start of classes, the pupils were dispersed among their lessons. Miss Marple paused before a display of student paintings, landscapes, portraits, abstract studies pinned beneath glass. One painting caught her attention, a moonlit grove lit solely by silver shafts of light, in which a lone figure seemed to stand at the edge of a dark pool. The technique was different from Olive's style. Marple studied the signature, C.E.F., Miss Caldwell's work. She asked aloud. Harrow peered over her shoulder. "Yes, she sometimes demonstrates for her students. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple pressed her lips together. "Only that this moonlit scene shares certain motifs with Olive's willow sketch. Solitude, darkness, an indistinct figure. Perhaps their visions overlapped." She made no further comment, leaving the inspector to ponder her observation. Soon they reached the staff annex, a series of small offices clustered around a central common room. Miss Caldwell's door was ajar. The art mistress sat behind a broad desk strewn with brushes, paint-stained notebooks, and battered reference volumes. Her normally neat auburn hair was rumpled, her blouse stained with smears of ochre. As the two entered, she jerked upright, eyes wide with shock. "Inspector Harrow? Miss Marple?" she stammered. I wasn't expecting visitors." Miss Marple advanced with gentle assurance. "Miss Caldwell, please sit. You understand how difficult this must be. We wish only to learn what you can tell us about Miss Phoenix's final days." Caldwell swallowed. Olive was different lately, restless. She missed a week of afternoon tutorials, but said nothing when pressed. She withdrew from her usual group on Wednesdays, the ones who painted watercolors under the elms, and, instead, spent evenings in the studio, working late. "Did you ever inquire why?" Harrow asked. Caldwell's eyes darted. "I asked. She said she was experimenting. She claimed to be developing a new technique for rendering shadow." She hesitated, then added quietly, "But I'm not sure that was the truth." Miss Marple leaned forward. "You have mentioned that Olive's sketches took on a darker tone silhouetted figures and night scenes. Did she ever speak of inspiration or a specific subject for these works?" The art mistress cast her gaze down. She said only that the subject was personal, something she could not share. When I pressed, she brushed it off. I regret being so insensitive. Perhaps, had I demanded more answers, things might have turned out differently. Marple's expression softened. Hindsight often lets us see what we could have done, but now we must look forward. Can you think of anyone with whom Olive might have arranged a midnight meeting at the Willow? Caldwell closed her eyes and tapped a finger to her lips. There was talk of Gabriel Chantry, the new classics tutor. He has a small grove of willows in the walled garden behind the dormitories. Olive had mentioned Latin epigrams recently. Something about translating lines from Ovid under the moonlight. Gabriel Chantry, Marple repeated. He's fairly new to Thistlebank, is he not? Just 2 months, Caldwell confirmed. He's quiet, reserved, popular among the older girls for his gentle manner, but keeps his own counsel. Some whispered about his past in Cambridge, but nothing scandalous, at least nothing known. Miss Marple made a note. Gabriel Chantry classics tutor, possible midnight correspondent. Beneath it, she added, Olive secretive, drawings night, solitude, classical references. Harrow rose. Thank you, Miss Caldwell. We may have more questions later. For now, please remain available. The art mistress nodded, and the 2 detectives left her office. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows, and Harrow closed his trench coat more tightly. Classics tutor, indeed, he mused. We should speak with Chantry next. Miss Marple paused at the door to Caldwell's office. Inspector, I should like a moment alone. Harrow inclined his head. Of course. Once he had exited, Marple re-entered the art mistress's room. She approached the desk and examined the notebooks. One lay open, its pages filled with swatches of color and penciled notes on brush technique. But beneath these lay a small slip of paper, half hidden under a palette. Marple extracted it carefully. It appeared to be a fragment torn from a program. For recital. The date printed at the top, October 15th. Beneath it, list of names, among them Olive Fenwick, A Midnight Sonata. Marple frowned. Recital at midnight, an odd event for a school. She slipped the paper into her notebook and closed the folder. As she moved to leave, she caught sight of a small photograph pinned to the corkboard. Olive and a young man hand in hand, their smiles flushed with excitement. Marple leaned closer. The man looked familiar, tall, dark-haired figure, possibly in his early 20s, wearing a suit that suggested a visiting scholar rather than staff. She straightened and left the room just as Harrow reappeared in the corridor. I have a hunch, she said softly. Miss Caldwell's notebooks yielded a recital program. Midnight Sonata. I suspect Olive may have participated in an afterwards musical event. The Willow Rendezvous may have followed. She held out the slip. We must discover who organized that recital and where the Willows come into play. Harrow nodded. Agreed. And once we speak with Gabriel Chantry, we might learn more. He paused. Jane, your intuition never ceases to amaze me. Miss Marple allowed a faint smile. It's not intuition, Inspector, but careful attention to the smallest details. Now, we should speak with Miss Fenwick's roommate, perhaps. She may have noticed late-night departures or whispered phone calls. They walked briskly down the hall toward the girls' dormitory, pausing only to pass a poster advertising the upcoming autumn carnival and a framed photograph of the entire staff. Outside the windows, rain had eased to a fine drizzle, though puddles still rippled in the courtyard. The low hum of student chatter drifted through closed doors, punctuated by the tolling of the school bell. As they reached the dormitory stairs, a stern voice hailed them from above. Inspector Harrow. Too early for guests, are we? They looked up to see headmistress Bathurst standing at the top of the stairs, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. In her hand, she held a sheaf of papers. I received this from the bursar, she said, handing Harrow a report. It seems there was an unauthorized electrical outage in the walled garden last night. The lights overseeing the willow grove were switched off for nearly an hour. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Harold. An outage timed to allow a midnight meeting, she observed. Someone planned carefully. Headmistress Bathurst's eyes widened. But who would have the knowledge and the audacity to tamper with the school's electrical system? That, madam, is what we intend to find out, Harold replied gravely as they ascended the stairs toward the dormitories. Miss Marple clutched a scrap of paper and the recital program. In her mind, the outlines of a hidden story began to form. A secret romance, whispered midnight concerts, a clandestine meeting beneath the willows, and someone who believed that Olive Phoenix's death would bury the truth forever. Yet, Marple knew that behind every tragedy lay human motosphere, passion, jealousy, revenge. She would unearth them all at the door to room 16. Olive had once shared a room with Charlotte Penn, her closest friend. Miss Marple paused. Charlotte, she called gently, turning the knob. Inside. The room was dim but tidy. 2 single beds, crisp blankets folded back. A small writing desk littered with textbooks and photographs of Charlotte and Olive laughing together pinned to the corkboard. Yet now the space felt hollow, as if Olive's absence had drained it of warmth. Miss Marple halted at the threshold, heart softening. "We will speak with Miss Penn," she whispered, "and perhaps, with her help, we will shine a light into the darkness that surrounds Thistlebank School." The candle on the nightstand flickered. Outside, the willow branches brushed against the window panes as though beckoning secrets to slip through, and somewhere beyond the walls, a hidden melody waited to be heard. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Night. The corridors of Thistlebank School seemed quieter in the pale light of the late morning than they had in the busier hours before sunrise. Miss Marple and Inspector Harold climbed the narrow staircase toward the girls' dormitory, their footsteps muffled on the carpeted steps. At the top, the smell of polished wood and the faint sweetness of talcum powder mingled with a deeper, more poignant scent, a lingering trace of Olive Phoenix's perfume, as if her spirit hovered still among her belongings. Miss Marple paused before room 16. The door, bearing a small brass plaque etched with Penn Fenwick. Now Charlotte Penn's name stood alone. The panel was cold beneath her fingertips. As she turned the knob, sighed, the light from a tall, mullioned window slanted across the neat, lavender-scented room. 2 single beds, one made, one now empty, flanked a low table. On the table, a half-finished cup of tea cooled next to an overturned photograph frame. The glass cracked. Charlotte Penn sat on the edge of her own bed, her school uniform neatly arranged, though her socks were mismatched and her hair pulled back in a loose plait. Her eyes, red-rimmed and glistening, focused on a leather-bound journal in her lap. Quit. At the sight of Miss Marple and Harold, she rose with a trembling hand to hastily close the book. "Miss Marple," she whispered, voice quavering. "Inspector Harold." She bowed her head, then looked up. "Thank you for seeing me." Miss Marple offered a gentle smile and drew a chair beside Charlotte's bed. "You're very brave, dear. We understand how hard this must be." She glanced at the overturned photograph. "May we?" Charlotte nodded and lifted the frame. Inside was a picture of the 2 girls arm in arm, beaming before the willow grove on a sunlit afternoon. Olive's dark curls framed her face, and Charlotte's hand rested protectively on Olive's shoulder. "She wore this perfume that day," Charlotte said, her voice tighter. "We wore matching dresses. We planned to paint together after study hall. I still can't imagine she's gone." Inspector Harold cleared his throat. "Miss Penn, we'd like to ask you a few questions about Olive's movements last night. Anything you noticed? An absence? Whispers? A letter received? Please tell us." Charlotte's gaze traveled to the window, where the willows brushed in the breeze. She set the photograph on the nightstand and took a breath. She left the room at 11 yesterday evening. I was already in bed, reading my Greek mythology. I heard her door click softly. I thought she was going to the loo, but I heard her whisper something into her phone. Under the willow. Midnight. Then she slipped out. Miss Marple leaned forward. You heard her say those words? Charlotte nodded, biting her lip, clear as day. I pressed myself against the headboard so she wouldn't hear me listening, but I heard the voice on the other end. A man's voice, deep and calm. I'll be there. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't dare call after her. She seemed, I don't know, determined, excited, even. Inspector Harrow exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. Said Olive, say anything to you before leaving. A note or a message. Charlotte rummaged in the top drawer of her bedside table and withdrew a folded piece of stationery. She gave me this a few nights ago, okay? She said it was design work for an autumn carnival invitation. Don't ask me why she showed it to me. Just said she was honored to help. I never looked closely until now. Ski handed the paper to Harrow. He unfolded it carefully. Printed in elegant calligraphy was a design, willow branches framing a musical clef, and the words, Midnight Sonata, Thistlebank, Autumn Carnival. Beneath the title, in tiny script, a line read, Perform, under the moon, behind the old wall, invitees only. Miss Marple studied the words. Perform, under the moon, she murmured. Not simply meet. Olive may have been part of the program. Okay. She made a note. Olive Fenwick, performer in Midnight Sonata. Then she looked at Charlotte. Did Olive ever practice any musical instrument with you? Charlotte's brow furrowed. No, but she mentioned to me weeks ago that she'd been rehearsing on someone's piano in the staff lounge. She said it was Gabriel Chantry's piano. He allowed her to practice there after hours when the music room was closed. Marple raised an eyebrow. A classics tutor who plays the piano and allowed a student into his private practice space. Unusual. Charlotte's lips trembled. He seemed kind, encouraging. He said her paintings had a poetic quality and wanted to see how music might enhance her art. Olive said it was thrilling and that Chantry had promised to present her at the carnival. I thought it was nothing more than a friendly encouragement. Inspector Harrow pocketed the invitation. Do you recall when she gave you this? Charlotte considered. About 2 weeks ago, before half-term, she said she needed help with the translation of some Latin for the carnival program. That's why I wasn't surprised by the scrap of the theater program you showed Miss Caldwell. But Olive never spoke of the willows in the walled garden. She called that place sacred. Miss Marple folded her hands. Sacred, indeed. And that scrap of paper leads us to believe the carnival program extended beyond the usual grounds. We must speak with Miss Teal in the bursar's office about this unauthorized event. Charlotte wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, it's all I know. After she left, I tossed and turned. At midnight, I heard a distant piano chord, soft, melancholy, and then nothing. Miss Marple's gaze softened. You did well, Charlotte. Nothing must be overlooked, not even a distant chord. She patted the girl's hand. You may go back to your studies now. And please, if you remember anything else, no matter how small, let us know. Charlotte nodded and touched the photograph once more before tucking it back into its frame. Thank you. As they stepped into the corridor, Inspector Harrow closed the door gently. This recital program, Midnight Sonata, a musical performance set in the walled garden, and Chantry provided practice space. We must question him. Miss Marple walked toward the stairwell. Deed. But first, I am curious about the burzar's comment on the electrical outage. There must be a record of who accessed the control room. Harrow unsheathed a notebook. I will retrieve the ledger from the bursar's office. I proceed to the classics tutor's quarters. Miss Marple nodded. Yes. Let us see whether Mr. Chantry's alibi holds. They descended to the ground floor, passing a row of shuttered music rooms. The hush was deeper here, punctuated only by the distant tolling of the chapel bell. Rain had resumed, slanting against high windows like tears. Miss Marple paused outside the door, bearing the sign, Gabriel Chantry, Tutor of Classics. She knocked softly. A muffled call of enter came, and she slipped inside. The room was small but tastefully appointed, book-lined shelves. A polished piano against one wall, framed botanical prints, and a large desk strewn with Latin texts. Chantry himself sat perched on a velvet chair, his dark hair falling over thoughtful eyes. On the piano lay sheet music titled Midnight Sonata, its score annotated in red pencil. Gabriel Chantry rose as they entered. His posture was calm, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Miss Marple, Inspector. To what do I owe this visit? Miss Marple inclined her head. Good morning, Mr. Chantry. We have questions about Olive Finnig's involvement in the Midnight Sonata performance and your access to the staff lounge piano. Chantry gestured to the music on the piano. Yes, that was her piece. She composed it, in part. I allowed her to rehearse here because I believed her talent deserved encouragement. The carnival committee asked for a special interlude. Inspector Harrow consulted his notebook. Were you aware that the performance was to take place at midnight, behind the walled garden, and that the garden lights had been disabled? Chantry's eyes narrowed. Midnight. I was under the impression the recital was scheduled for dusk at the amphitheater. Someone must have changed the arrangements without my knowledge. Miss Marple's gaze flicked to the annotated sheet music. You labeled these cues garden entrance and willow interlude. Chantry ran a hand through his hair. You annotated suggestions for staging if the committee wished to move outdoors. But I did not organize such a meeting. I returned the key to the lounge, and thereafter I retired for the night. Inspector Harrow interjected. Can you account for your whereabouts between 10 and midnight yesterday evening? Chantry hesitated, glancing at the piano, then looked up. I was grading essays in the headmistress's study until 10:30. Then I walked home to my cottage in the lane. You can verify with the gardener who saw me pass outside. Miss Marple studied him. Hey, your handwriting is on the invitations shown to Miss Penn. You must have known more than you admit. She paused. Mr. Chantry, is there anything else you wish to disclose? Any correspondence with Olive beyond her artistic pursuits? Chantry looked away, then met her gaze. She confided in me about her fear that someone was watching her. She claimed she'd seen a figure in the willows. Late one evening, she asked me to accompany her, but I refused. I thought it fanciful, a product of her imagination. His voice dropped. I regret that now. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Mr. Chantry. That is all for now. They withdrew into the corridor. Outside, the rain fell harder. Inspector Harrow exhaled, at least uncomfortable, but he denies involvement. Yet, he knew of the midnight program, and he feared someone in the willows. Miss Marple clicked her tongue softly. Yes, and the only person beside Catholic Olive who knew that secret was her correspondent Tand, possibly the person who turned off the lights. The gardener's testimony may clear his alibi, but our culprit remains closer at hand. She glanced at the drenched quad beyond the window. Let us reconvene with the bursar and inspect those control room logs next. I suspect our midnight sonata was meant to silence more than music. They walked briskly toward the bursar's office, steeling themselves against the chill and the unanswered questions that still lingered in the damp air of Thistlebank School. Chapter 4. The Ledger of Secrets. By the time Miss Marple and Inspector Harrow reached the bursar's office, the sky had taken on a bruised light afternoon purple, and clusters of lanterns glowed through the mist. The bursar, Mr. Reginald Teal, sat behind a broad oak desk cluttered with ledgers, parchments, and an aged brass lamp. His spectacles reflected the lamplight as he looked up in surprise at the sudden arrival of the two investigators. Inspector Harrow, Miss Marple, good heavens, you startled me, he said, offering a nervous smile. What can I do for you? At this hour, Inspector Harrow produced the report he had been handed by Headmistress Bathurst. Mr. Teal, we have reason to believe that last night there was a deliberate power interruption in the walled garden. I'm told you maintained the log of all electrical access. We'd like to review the entries for the past week. The bursar's face paled. Of course, though I must warn you, our logs are precise but sparse. Very few members of staff have the key for the control room. He rose and unlocked a glass-fronted cabinet behind his desk, retrieving a fat bound volume stamped electrical access register. Here, he said, placing it before them. Entries are by date and time, with staff signature. Miss Marple opened the register and flipped to the page for the night of the incident. At 2347, beside a neat, cursive signature, was the name Alice Waterhouse. Beneath that, at 0:45, a second entry read Gabriel Chantry. No other entries marked between 22 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Inspector Harold's brow furrowed as he traced the entries with his finger. Alice Waterhouse, she's the head of maintenance. And Mr. Chantry claimed he left the premises at 10:30. He looked toward Miss Marple. This contradicts his statement. The bursar interjected. Mr. Chantry often signs in to verify he's restored power after maintenance or testing. But I thought the last entry this week was on Tuesday. Can show you the previous days if you wish. Miss Marple gently closed the register. Yes, please. And, Mr. Teal, did Alice Waterhouse have reason to access that control room last night? She rarely does so after dusk. The bursar tapped his pen against the desk. Indeed, she reported a broken lamp in the adjacent courtyard, which she said she would fix. But the outage was in the walled gardens line, separate from the courtyard. She may not even have known she switched that circuit. Miss Marple folded her hands thoughtfully. We will need to speak with Ms. Waterhouse. But first, Inspector, there is the matter of the missing verses from Miss Finnick's journal, the one found in her room. She turned to the bursar. Mr. Teal, did you notice any disappearance among the bursar's own records? Anything missing or tampered with? Teal blinked. Not that I'm aware of, although the journals and personal diaries of pupils are not filed here. Only the official registers, attendance, payments, repairs. But the bursar's safe did have an entry, Olive Finnick's name, indicating she filed something here last term. Placed a note that it was a personal filing, but assumed it was family correspondence. Inspector Harrow's eyes lit with interest. Personal filing. We must inspect the safe. He led them to a steel-bound cabinet in the corner, its door secured with a combination lock. Miss Marple crouched before it, her eyes scanning the brass plate that bore the mechanism. You don't suppose someone might have removed Olive's documents? Sfeel opened the safe, producing a handful of envelopes and a small leather satchel. Here are the filings. Let's see. He sorted through them. Letters from guardians, scholarship papers, and one envelope marked simply OFSC seal broken. Miss Marple picked up the envelope, noting its edges were torn rather than neatly slit. She peered inside to reveal loose pages torn from a small pocket diary. Each page bore Olive's careful script, lines from a verse she had been working on, a poem addressed to my beloved under the willows. But the final pages were missing. The poem abruptly ended at stanza 3. Miss Marple's voice was soft but firm. Somebody removed the last verses. Those could have revealed the identity of her correspondent, or her feelings for them. She laid the pages on the desk. We must recover the rest. Inspector Harrow tucked the pages into an evidence bag. Do you think Ms. Waterhouse might have taken them? Miss Marple's eyes met his. It is possible, though unlikely. Ms. Waterhouse maintains engines and lights, not love letters. But the signature in the ledger suggests she was in the control room at the precise time someone would switch off the power. She might have witnessed something, okay? Or perhaps has motives we have not yet uncovered. The rain intensified outside, its thrum against the window pane heightening the urgency in the room. The bursar closed the safe. I'm sorry, don't recall anyone else handling that envelope, okay? I only noted its presence last term after a rehearsal dinner in the Great Hall. Miss Marple folded her notebook closed. Very well, we will speak with Ms. Waterhouse. Then perhaps the bursar may allow us to question other staff. There is also the matter of Charlotte Penn's knowledge of the broken heart motif. A visit to the infirmary is in order of confided to me. She suffered a minor wrist injury late last week. Inspector Harrow nodded. Hint, I will arrange to detain Gabriel Chantry until his alibi is confirmed. If he signed back in at 0:45, his claim of returning home is in doubt. Miss Marple paused as they stood. We tread carefully, Inspector. Our suspect or suspects have proven resourceful. People will close ranks for one another. But the truth is stronger than loyalty, and it has a way of surfacing. Later, as dusk draped the campus in a velvet cloak, Miss Marple found herself alone. In the chapel, its stained glass windows glowing from within, she moved toward a simple wooden pew and knelt, pressing her shawl into the cushion. The stillness was a balm to her thoughts. She whispered a silent prayer for Olive Pfennig's restless spirit. Her mind replayed the fragments collected so far: the midnight recital, the broken sundial, the hidden poem, Olive's sketch of a solitary figure beneath the willow, and now the ledger entries implicating 2 staff members. But one detail had gnawed at her: the scrap of invitation Charlotte Penn had held was beautifully printed and expertly calligraphed. The school's carnival committee did not have such artistry on hand. Where had the invitations been produced? Miss Marple closed her eyes. She could almost hear the hush of paper against the desk, the scratch of a nib. And then she recalled the printing press in the workshop used occasionally by the drama department to craft props. It lay in the basement of the old classroom block, rarely accessed. She rose to her feet, her resolve firm. Gathering her shawl, she slipped from the chapel into the cooling evening air. Inspector Harrow awaited her at the entrance, raising an eyebrow as she emerged. Back from your devotions, he asked dryly. What have you deduced? Miss Marple smiled mildly. That we have overlooked the printing press in the old classrooms. That is where the carnival programs end. Perhaps the invitations were printed. I intend to investigate there. Nodded, producing his torch. Lead the way, Jane. They crossed the courtyard. Lantern light flickered through rainy haze. In the hush of approaching night, the campus held its breath, as if awaiting the next step in a careful dance. But Miss Marple moved confidently, certain that each flicker of perception brought her closer to the heart of the tragedy at Thistlebank School. Identity of the one who would kill to conceal a secret beneath the willows. Chapter 5. Echoes in the press room. The corridors of Thistlebank School were hushed at dusk. It's the only sound, the distant drip of rain from sloping eaves. Miss Marple and Inspector Harrow navigated the narrow passage that led to the old classroom block. The waning daylight filtered through tall windows, casting mottled shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Here, the building's history pressed on them, a place once vibrant with lectures and pupil chatter, now seldom used except for drama rehearsals and storeroom overflow. Miss Marple paused before a heavy oak door marked Art and Drama Workshop. The brass handle was cold beneath her fingers as she turned it. Inside, the room smelled of varnish and paper dust. Work tables lined the walls, strewn with stage props, paint-splattered drop cloths, and rolls of canvas. At the far corner, a bulky iron contraption stood half-hidden beneath a canvas tarp. The printing press. Here it is, Miss Marple said, pulling back the cloth. The press's platen and rollers gleamed darkly in the torchlight. This is where our invitations and programs could have been printed neatly, professionally, and without drawing attention. Inspector Harrow knelt to examine the press bed. It's been used recently. The inkwell tray still holds traces of black pigment. And look here, a smear of white ink along the edge. Miss Marple guided his torch beam to a rubber roller perched on the shelf above. Notice how this roller is partially cleaned. Someone attempted to wipe away evidence, but the residue remains. She drew a gloved finger across the roller, brushing off a fragment of paper. And this leftover scraps of invitation stock. They bear the same paper and watermark as the carnival invitations. Harrow bagged the roller and paper bits as exhibits. So someone with access to this room printed the Midnight Sonata invitations. But who? Miss Marple stood and surveyed the room. Shelves of stage scripts and props lined one wall. On a peg hung a stained canvas apron. The drama club uses this space under the supervision of Miss Penelope Graves, our English and drama mistress. She and her assistant, Mr. Wilcox, have keys. She paused, then added, yet no one has mentioned drama in connection with the carnival program. I suspect Miss Graves is unaware of how the space was used. Harrow nodded. Let us question her, but first, I think we ought to see Ms. Waterhouse about her presence in the control room and her possible knowledge of the invitations. They retraced their steps through the labyrinthine corridors and descended to the maintenance offices. The yellow glow of a single lamp illuminated a cramped room where tools and spare parts crowded every surface. Alice Waterhouse, the head of maintenance, sat behind a battered metal desk, her work overalls stained with grease and grime. She looked up as they entered, expression guarded. Miss Waterhouse, Inspector Harrow began, placing the ledger entries on her desk. You signed into the control room at 23:47 last night and then again at 0:45. Can you explain why you returned after completing your task? Waterhouse ran a gloved hand through her short cropped hair. The boulevard lamp was fixed by 23:55. I thought the power in the garden had been restored. But when I heard about the outage this morning, I returned to check on, signed in to reactivate it. She swallowed. I had no idea anyone would use it for a midnight concert. Miss Marple folded her hands. Miss Waterhouse, did you notice any evidence that someone accessed the press room prints, paper scraps, or overhear any discussion of after-hours use of the drama workshop? Waterhouse's eyes narrowed. I haven't been down to the old block in weeks. Maintenance calls there only when the heating breaks, and it's locked after 5. If someone wanted to use it, they'd have to borrow a key or pick the lock. Holds the keys? Marple asked. The keys are with Miss Graves and her assistant, Liam Wilcox. I did see Mr. Wilcox early yesterday evening when he collected scenery bolts for the autumn play. But after that, I didn't see either of them. She shrugged. I imagine they both returned later to store props, but I didn't think to check. Inspector Harrow exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. We should speak with Mr. Wilcox and Miss Graves immediately. Waterhouse nodded. Help yourselves to the keys. They're in my desk drawer. She slid a battered tin box across the table, rattling with the metal keys. The moon had risen by the time they reached the drama workshop again. Miss Marple carried a single key, while Harrow held a small evidence bag containing paper fragments. The press room door swung open at their approach, revealing the printing press in stark silhouette. We must hurry, Marple whispered. If someone still uses this space, they could remove evidence. They entered, securing the door behind them. Using a fresh white glove, Marple examined the press's lever mechanism, then traced her fingers along the wooden shelves until she found a neat stack of unused invitation stock. Here is fresh paper, identical to the scraps. It must have been stored here for printing. And over there, she pointed to a corner, are ink-stained clubs, too fine for a drama property. Inspector Harrow held up the gloves. They appeared. New, size small. On the cuff, a monogram. P.G. Penelope Graves. He mused. Miss Marple nodded. Quite likely. Miss Graves would keep gloves here to handle paperwork. The monogram suggests personal ownership. She knelt to inspect the floor and found a small coin-a-theater ticket token bearing the school crest. She slipped it into an evidence pouch. These tokens are used in the student-run coffee house. Miss Graves sometimes attends after rehearsal. Harold frowned. But why would she print invitations here? Perhaps at someone's behest. Tapple stood and bent toward the press. Our culprit needed a confidential space. The press room fits the bill. But they also needed someone with knowledge of calligraphy and composition. Mr. Wilcox assists with set design lettering, but Miss Graves is the English teacher. She has an eye for words and style. She paused, then smiled wryly. Perhaps they collaborated. Harold pocketed a final scrap of paper. Should confront them, but delicately. Did you want to visit the infirmary for Charlotte's mention of Olive's wrist injury? Miss Marple adjusted her shawl. Yes, but first, let us secure this room. Can call for reinforcements once we have Miss Graves and Mr. Wilcox in custody. Single lantern burned in the infirmary corridor when they arrived. Nurse Alden greeted them with a polite nod and directed them to a bed beside a small examination table. On the bed lay a plaster cast encasing a slender wrist. This is where Olive had the fracture, the nurse said. She claimed it was from a fall in the garden. I treated it on Thursday evening. She nodded to the cast. It remained unremarkable till I heard of her death this morning. Miss Marple knelt to examine the cast. She turned it gently to reveal a small scuff beneath the plaster where the cast had been adjusted. Underneath, the skin bore a faint bruise in a circular pattern. A flower pot ring, perhaps? Nurse Alden frowned. A flower pot? No, she said. She slipped on the moss by the fountain. But her story seemed rushed. Inspector Harrell's expression sharpened. Your permit to treat injuries can? You recall whether anyone else brought her to you? A classmate? Staff member? Art mistress escorted her, the nurse replied. She brought Olive here promptly and left immediately. She did not ask me many questions. Miss Marple rose. Thank you, Nurse Alden. That will be all. As they turned to leave, she added softly, a scuff in the pattern of a flower pot ring suggests she bruised her wrist against a ceramic rim. Someone may have engaged her in the garden before her recital, perhaps as a precursor to the meeting beneath the willows. In the dim courtyard outside, a hush had fallen. Rain had paused, leaving the stones damp and glistening. Miss Marple and Inspector Harrell exchanged findings. So, Harrell said, we have gloves monogrammed PG, letter stock and inky roller from the press room. Secret recital printed offers by someone with key access and Olive's fractured wrist with a painting bruise. He paused. Penelope Graves, the drama mistress hand, perhaps Mr. Wilcox, are implicated. But what is their motive? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. There is one more question we must answer. Who would benefit from Olive's absence? Or worse, her silence? A rivalry in the art department, perhaps, or a forbidden liaison. She drew her shawl about her shoulders. Tomorrow, we will bring Miss Graves and Mr. Wilcox to the headmistress's study. We will present our evidence and see who falters. But for now, we have uncovered a network of secrets woven through ink and paper and tragedy, and in those threads lies the path to justice for Olive Fenwick. As they walked across the courtyard, the willows in the walled garden stirred gently behind them, as though whispering of midnight concerts and broken promises echoes waiting to be heard. Chapter 6. The gathering stormy brittle. Dawn light filtered through the mullioned windows of the headmistress's study as Miss Marple and Inspector Harrell arrived, their minds laden with the previous night's discoveries. Outside, the campus was stirring. Mist clung to the rose hedges, and the distant clang of breakfast bells echoed through the corridors. Yet, within the study's high-ceilinged confines, a tension rippled beneath the calm veneer of scholarly calm. Headmistress Eleanor Bathurst stood behind her imposing mahogany desk, her posture as rigid as the century-old wood. Flanking her were Miss Penelope Graves, the drama mistress, and Liam Wilcox, her assistant, both looking pale and apprehensive. On a side table lay the evidence: gloves embroidered PG, charts of invitation stock paper, the torn diary pages, and the battered roller from the printing press. A framed photograph of Olive Fenwick under the moonlit willow grove sat beside them. A silent witness to the gathering storm, Miss Marple regarded the assembled group with serene gravity. "Thank you all for coming at this early hour. We have some questions regarding Miss Fenwick's tragic death, and the evidence we have collected requires your explanation." Miss Graves's hands trembled as she smoothed her skirt. "Of course, Miss Marple, I assure you, I had no part in Miss Fenwick's death." Inspector Harrow cleared his throat. "Penelope, let us begin with your monogrammed gloves found in the press room, alongside fresh ink and paper matching the Midnight Sonata invitations. Can you explain why they were there?" Miss Graves swallowed. I borrowed those gloves when handling student manuscripts to avoid smudging ink. I last used them on the invitations for the carnival program, but I had the invitations printed at a local stationer's in Wells, not here." Her voice wavered. "I paid for them myself. I thought it efficient." Miss Marple lifted an eyebrow. "A stationer's? And yet the school press room bore evidence of their production last night. The ink type and paper stock matched precisely. Do you have a receipt or record of your order?" Penelope hesitated, glancing at the headmistress for support. Bathurst leaned forward. "Penelope, is this true? If you commissioned them externally, we should have documentation." Miss Graves turned to Bathurst, eyes brimming. I was embarrassed to burden the school with extra costs, so I arranged quietly. I have the receipts somewhere." She rummaged in her bag, producing a crumpled slip, an invoice from Wells Press and Stationers for a generic white cardstock, but not the specialized watermark paper used here. It's not the same paper. Inspector Harrow examined the invoice. Indeed, stock is plain, but the inventory in the drama workshop includes only our watermark stock. There is no record of external deliveries of specialized paper. He tapped the invitation fragments boxed on the table. "Where, then, did you print these?" Miss Graves's voice faltered. I simply assumed that the drama workshop press could handle text too. I didn't think to ask permission. I only borrowed the key from Ms. Waterhouse for a moment. I printed the invitations here late on Tuesday, then cleaned the press as best I could." She glanced at Miss Marple. "But I did not switch off the lights in the garden. I arrived home before 10. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Very well, Mr. Wilcox. You assisted Miss Graves with set preparations. Did you witness her entering the press room on Tuesday? And can you account for her whereabouts on Wednesday night between 11:30 and midnight?" Liam Wilcox opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowing hard. I saw her return to get the gloves and paper, yes. That was at around 8:30. After that, I went to retrieve scene lights in the storeroom, and I didn't see her again." He shifted uneasily. "On Wednesday, I was in the music room until nearly 11, helping Miss Caldwell with frames. I returned to the workshop, locked the door, then left for my cottage." "I'm sure Miss Graves was already gone, Inspector." Harrow's brow creased, but the ledger shows that Ms. Waterhouse entered the control room at 23:47. Then Mr. Chantry returned at 0:45. Neither Miss Graves nor Mr. Wilcox is recorded. Miss Marple, perhaps you can explain the discrepancy." Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly, recalling the pattern of entries. "It appears our suspects, Gabriel Chantry and Alice Waterhouse, were covering someone's tracks by signing in after the fact. But events surrounding Miss Finnick's wrist injury and the broken sundial also require clarification. She opened her notebook to the pages torn from Olive's diary. Miss Graves, do you recognize these verses? Penelope peered at the lines, a poem addressed to a beloved beneath willow shadows, speaking of hidden passion and moonlit vows. She blanched. Miss Olive showed them to me. She wanted feedback on her poetic voice. I advised her to be cautious. The tone was too intimate for a school publication. Miss Marple's gaze was gentle but firm, right? And yet the final verses, which would have named the beloved by metaphor or name, were removed from the bursar safe. Who retrieved them, and why? Miss Graves turned to Wilcox. I didn't know about the diary. Olive only gave me drafts to read. Wilcox looked startled. I had no idea. He ran a hand through his hair. I did see Olive slip something into the safe when I helped her file her family papers. She said it was private. Inspector Harrow leaned forward. Olive's wrist, injury treated by Nurse Alden bore a bruise in the pattern of a flower pot rim, who accompanied her to the fountain that evening. Miss Graves and Wilcox exchanged glances. Wilcox stammered, Miss Caldwell. She brought her here. But the art mistress was not present to confirm. Miss Marple laid a finger on the photograph of Olive under the willow grove. Our victim painted that grove often, but it was here we found the broken sundial and the hidden invitation note. Our midnight sonata likely concluded there. Who guided Olive to that location? Someone she trusted implicitly. Silent as the students began their morning lectures, muffled through the walls. Finally, Penelope Graves spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I did. I accompanied her to the walled garden once when she thought the groundskeeper might have discovered her sketchbook. But that night, she insisted on going alone. She said she had to face her muse by moonlight. Miss Marple regarded her, and yet Nurse Alden's bruise suggests she fell against a flower pot, perhaps deliberately startled or shoved. Cox's eyes widened. No, I would never, Inspector Harrow, cut him off. Our goal is the truth, Liam. If you know more, speak now. Wilcox hesitated, then his shoulders sagged. Fine. I escorted Olive to the fountain on Thursday evening. I regret it now. She was distraught, saying someone was following her. I wanted to calm her. I lifted her arm to steady her. She slipped, hit the pot, but I caught her. Then I ran away, she said. She was fine. I didn't want to get involved. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but Olive's fear ran deeper. Someone orchestrated the power outage, the midnight performance, and even the fracture. And they stole her final verses to hide the identity of her beloved. Penelope Graves put a hand to her mouth. Olive loved someone. Someone, not a student. I thought it inappropriate, but never suspected. Not him. She nodded toward Chantry's portrait on the wall. The tutor's image showed poised calm, dark eyes that seemed fond. Inspector Harrow's gaze sharpened. Gabriel Chantry. You knew of Olive's feelings. Penelope nodded, tears in her eyes. She trusted him. He said he cared for more than her art. I never thought. I thought it harmless mentorship. At that moment, the headmistress placed a steaming jug of tea on the desk. She looked from one face to another. Is this what you suspected all along, Miss Marple? That a teacher abused his position? Miss Marple rose, her presence serene but resolute. Not yet confirmed, but the threads converge upon Mr. Chantry. He signed back into the control room at 0:45, contradicting his alibi. He annotated Olive's music with garden cues. Olive's secret verses named her beloved, and he had access to both the press room and the bursar's safe through trust and keys. Inspector Harrow stood beside her. Mr. Chantry will join us here shortly. We'll see if he can reconcile these facts. As they spoke, a firm knock came at the door. In walked Gabriel Chantry, his expression composed but eyes shadowed. Behind him, followed Alice's Waterhouse, summoned to clarify her ledger entries. The storm, long gathering, had at last broken upon them, all leaving in its wake a tangled revelation that would determine who had silenced Olive Fenwick forever. Chapter 7. Confrontations and Confessions. Miss Marple regarded Gabriel Chantry as he entered the study, his calm composure a fragile facade beneath the weight of mounting evidence. Inspector Harrow motioned for Ms. Waterhouse to stand beside the tutor, and Penelope Graves and Liam Wilcox drew closer to the cluster of chairs in the center of the room. The headmistress remained behind her desk, a rigid sentinel. Miss Marple began softly, "Mr. Chantry, thank you for coming so promptly. We have questions concerning your whereabouts and actions on the night Miss Fenwick died." She paused to choose her words. "First, you signed back into the walled garden control room at 045. Please explain." Chantry's pale lips twitched. "I returned to ensure the lights had been fully restored after Ms. Waterhouse's repairs. I was informed of an unexpected outage at dawn and wanted to verify all circuits were functional again." He met Ms. Waterhouse's steady gaze. She told me there had been problems. Alice Waterhouse stiffened. "I only fixed the courtyard lamp." There was no reason for Mr. Chantry to revisit the control room. "I left at 23:55. Inspector Harrow interjected. "Ms. Waterhouse, you signed out at 23:55, yet the ledger records. Mr. Chantry sent in at 045. That interval corresponds exactly to the time of Miss Fenwick's death." Chantry's voice wavered. I walked past the control room on my way back to my cottage. The button glowed. I thought to press it, just in case." Miss Marple's cool gaze did not waver. "Mr. Chantry, your annotations on the midnight sonata score indicate you knew precisely where the performance would occur. Garden entrance at Q2. Willow interlude at Q4. You suggested staging under the willows, designed that staging." Chantry's shoulders slumped. "The Carnival Committee asked for creative input. Miss Fenwick's paintings inspired the idea. I merely provided suggestions." He looked toward Penelope Graves. She approved them. Penelope shuddered. "I did believe in it would be safe during daylight. I never imagined a midnight concert." Miss Marple continued, "Yet you and Miss Waterhouse were the only staff with access to both the press room and the control room. Someone printed the invitations here, then disabled the lights in the garden. Miss Waterhouse denies knowledge of the concert, and you claim only to have restored power. And then the poem pages who retrieved those from the bursar's safe." Chantry's gaze flickered. "I saw the pages when Olive showed them to me. She confided to me that she'd filed them for safekeeping, but she asked me not to read the final stanzas. I never touched them." Inspector Harrow raised an eyebrow. "And yet the envelope was opened, torn roughly, and the pages removed. Ms. Waterhouse, did you access the safe that evening?" Waterhouse shook her head, but her eyes darted toward Chantry. "No, I needed only my maintenance keys. I don't have the combination." She bit her lip. "But I did see Mr. Chantry in the bursar's office on Tuesday." Chantry's face paled. Miss Marple held up a hand. "Let us be precise. On Tuesday, you retrieved several items from the safe among them. The recital program and that envelope marked OFU placed the recital program with Miss Caldwell's files. The diary pages you removed." Turning to Waterhouse, "Miss Waterhouse, did you witness this?" Alice hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Yes, I fixed the heating pipes in the bursar's office when I noticed steam escaping above the safe. I glanced and Mr. Chantry was there, fiddling with papers." She swallowed. He seemed agitated. Inspector Harrow leaned forward. "You did not report this?" Otaro's shoulders sagged. I was told by Mr. Chantry to mind my own work. He warned me of gossip. I feared for my job." Miss Marple's gaze softened. Fear can compel silence. But now, for Olive's sake, we must speak the truth. Okay. She turned back to Chantry. Mr. Chantry, you have your footprints on the path to the walled garden, the grass crushed under your shoes, and the gardener confirms he saw you pass at midnight. You brought someone there. He looked down. I went to see Olive. She sent for me. She said she needed me to rescue her from someone she feared. I arrived to find the lights out and her lying at the base of the sundial. Miss Marple's tone remained gentle. Rescue her from whom? Chantry swallowed hard. Okay. I thought it was Miss Graves or Mr. Wilcox playing a cruel prank, but I was too late. I found her and then I tried to lift her, but her neck was broken. I panicked and ran. A hush settled. Inspector Harrow rose. That explains the broken neck, the bruise on her wrist, and your return to restore power. But it does not explain who turned the lights off initially, printed the invitations, or removed the diary pages. Miss Marple tapped her notebook. 3 actions. 1 aim, to lure Olive to the garden, to keep her isolated, and to conceal the nature of her secret love. Who stands to lose by that revelation? She looked at Penelope Graves. Miss Graves, you confessed your part in printing the invitations, but you believed them harmless. Did you know who Olive's beloved was? Penelope trembled. Yes, she loved Mr. Chantry. A gasp rippled through the room. Waterhouse covered her mouth. Inspector Harrow frowned. Her own tutor. Penelope nodded, tears streaming. She told me they had an understanding. I begged them to end it. It was forbidden. I thought they would be discreet. Miss Marple turned to Chantry. And you, sir, did you love Olive Fenwick? Chantry's shoulders sank as though relieved. Yes, I cared for her more than I should have. I believed I protected her, kept her safe from judgment. Okay, but I never meant to harm her. Miss Marple's gaze was unwavering. Then who lured her into danger? Who engineered the false power outage, printed invitations to mislead her, and removed her final verses to hide the truth? She scanned each face in the room. One of you acted out of jealousy or duty. But the hands that manipulated the levers, the press, and the safe belonged to someone else. She paused and fixed her gaze on Alice's Waterhouse. Miss Waterhouse, you hold no love for Olive yet. You hold the keys to the control room and the drama workshop. You had access and motive. You blamed Olive's nocturnal activities for disturbing the order of the school. Waterhouse's eyes widened. That is not true. Miss Marple continued, voice calm. On the night before the tragedy, you discovered Olive's midnight plans in the press room, a space you guard zealously. You saw her notes in the drama mistress's gloves and recognized the watermark paper. You turned off the lights, lured her into the garden, fractured her wrists to disorient her, and then, when she confronted you, her neck was broken in the struggle. You then replaced her diary pages in the bursar's safe to conceal the poem's intended recipient. She stepped closer. Confession may spare your reputation further disgrace. Waterhouse sagged as if a weight crushed her. Tears welled. She mocked me. Olive teased me about wrinkles and upkeep. She said I was too old to care for lights or classrooms. She said I should step aside for younger staff. She laughed at my limp. I found her note of midnight meetings. I was furious. I flipped the switch, meant only to scare her, to show her I could. But when she slipped, she wouldn't stop screaming. I panicked. Miss Marple's voice was soft. And in that panic, you... Waterhouse sobbed. I pulled to steady her neck, but I broke it. I didn't know it would kill her. She sank to her knees. I loved this school. I wanted to protect it, but I destroyed the one thing I could never reclaim. Inspector Harrow produced handcuffs. Alice Waterhouse, you are under arrest for the manslaughter of Olive Fenwick. He placed the cuffs on her trembling wrists. Penelope Graves knelt beside Waterhouse, sobbing. Chantry buried his face in his hands. Miss Marple folded her shawl around her shoulders and addressed the headmistress. Bathurst, I recommend you commission a memorial in the walled garden to remember the tragedy and to honor the innocent. The headmistress placed a firm hand on Miss Marple's arm. Thank you, Jay. Your insight has brought justice back to Thistlebank. She paused, her gaze drifting to the photograph of Olive beneath the willow. May we ensure no more shadows fall here. As Alice Waterhouse was led away, the first autumn leaf drifted past the open window, settling on the sill like a silent benediction. Outside, the willows whispered once more, their long branches swaying gently in the morning breeze, bearing witness to a truth born of darkness. I'll lay to rest. Chapter 8. Aftermath. Beneath the willows the morning sun filtered to the high windows of Thistlebank School's chapel, casting multicolored patterns across the stone floor where the congregation of staff and students had gathered for the memorial service. Beneath the vaulted arches, the air was still, heavy with the mingled scents of lilies and wax candles. Miss Marple sat quietly in a pew near the front, her knitted shawl draped over her shoulders, while Inspector Harrow stood at the back. Overseeing the solemn proceedings, Headmistress Bathurst stepped to the lectern, her usually composed features softened by grief. She cleared her throat and spoke in a voice that carried through the hushed nave. Today, we honor Olive Fenwick, bright in talent, generous in spirit, and taken from us too soon. May the memory of her art and her laughter live on in these halls, and may we find solace in knowing that justice has been served. A hush settled as the choir, composed of members of the fourth form, lifted their voices in a plaintive hymn, soft, sustained notes that wavered like candlelight. Miss Marple allowed her thoughts to drift back through the events of the past days, the hidden invitations, the broken sundial, the torn diary pages, and finally, Alice Waterhouse's anguished confession. Each piece had been a thread in a tapestry of hidden truths woven by fear, jealousy, and the desperate desire to protect what one cherished. After the service concluded, congregation processed out into the courtyard, where a temporary plaque had been affixed to the sundial's base in loving memory of Olive Fenwick. 1910 tragedy. Beneath these willows, a wreath of wildflowers lay at its foot. Miss Marple lingered, allowing students to file past and place single blooms upon the plaque. A hush had fallen over the quad, broken only by whispered condolences and the rustle of leaves overhead. Inspector Harrow approached her quietly. The staff and students are shaken, but they find comfort in the memorial. The headmistress wishes to thank you for your help. She attributes the swift resolution of the case to your unparalleled insight. Miss Marple nodded. It is enough that the school can now heal. But there is still much to be done. Olive's family must be informed of the circumstances and the bursars safe secured against further intrusion. She paused, gazing at the slender willow branches swaying in the breeze. And yet I feel a lingering sorrow. Olive's final verses remain only half known, and her art deserves celebration, not just mourning. Harrow studied her with understanding. Perhaps a posthumous exhibition of her work might ease the school's grief and reveal the depth of her talent. Miss Marple smiled. An excellent idea. Perhaps in the lecture hall, her paintings can hang beneath her poem complete. At last, she sighed softly. It shall be her voice echoing through these walls rather than whispers of tragedy. Later, that afternoon, Miss Marple found herself in the bursar's office, consulting with Mr. Teal about securing the safe. The ledger had been updated to require dual signatures for access, and the envelope, marked OF, was now resealed with archival care. Teal looked relieved. Thank you, Miss Marple. I will see that only the headmistress and I hold the new keys. Outside, the autumn carnival preparations continued, though more subdued than originally planned. Paper lanterns, once destined to light a midnight concert, now hung along the main quad, pastel shades reflecting hopeful spirits rather than shadows. The carnival committee members, teachers, and prefects alike worked quietly to repurpose the invitations into programs for a daytime art show. Honoring Olive's passion, Miss Marple strolled the corridor toward the art studio, where Miss Caldwell had arranged a display of Olive's unfinished works. The door stood ajar, and inside, the art mistress stood before a large canvas draped in white cloth. As Miss Marple entered, Caldwell pulled aside the cloth to reveal one of Olive's most powerful paintings, a lone figure beneath the willow grove, rendered in deep emerald and midnight blue, its posture both melancholic and defiant. "She called this midnight vigil," Caldwell said softly, voice catching on the name. "She painted it alone in the moonlight last month. Now, it seems a farewell." Miss Marple stepped forward, studying the brushstrokes. The figure's silhouette was rendered in a shimmering technique that captured the unique twilight of Somerset evenings. The leaves above were nearly translucent, as if lit from within. At the base of the willow, a sundial lay broken, echoing the one in the garden. "It is a masterpiece," Miss Marple murmured, her final vision. She turned to Caldwell. "This deserves to be shown alongside the poem. Okay. Would you allow me to help organize an exhibition tomorrow?" Caldwell nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, the students could present readings of her verses, accompanied by their own artwork, inspired by her style. It would celebrate her influence and ensure she is remembered for her gifts. Miss Marple smiled. "Then let us see to it." That evening, as the last rays of sun slipped behind the hills, Miss Marple returned to the walled garden. The same path she had walked on the night of the tragedy was now lined with lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. Students placed candles beneath each willow branch, creating a circle of soft light. In the center, the sundial's base bore its temporary plaque, and a small easel held the blank invitation note Charlotte Penn had discovered. Miss Marple knelt and picked up the scrap of paper, reading the words once more. "Midnight Sonata. Thistlebank Autumn Carnival. Perform under the moon, behind the old wall. Invitees only." She folded it carefully and placed it beside the sundial, alongside a single white rose. Then she rose and surveyed the scene. The willows, the lanterns, the candlelight. Hush settled over the garden, as if nature itself paused to honor Olive's memory. From behind her, a soft voice spoke. "Miss Marple." She turned to see Charlotte Penn standing at the garden entrance, her expression bright but solemn. In her hands, she held a small, bound book. "I thought you might like this," Charlotte said, offering the volume. All the verses I could recover, stanzas 1 through 3, and a translation in Latin on the facing pages. I found it in the Burz's archives with the recovered pages." Her voice trembled. "I hope you can help me finish it, Miss." Marple took the book and smiled warmly. "Thank you, Charlotte. I will work with you to reconstruct the missing image so Olive's voice can be heard in full." Charlotte's eyes shone. "I like that, for Olive." Together, they placed the book on the easel and lit a candle beside it. As its flame danced across the pages, Miss Marple thought of the path that had brought them here, from the first glimmer of suspicion to the final confession, and now to remembrance and restoration. The tragedy had revealed human frailty, but it had also illuminated compassion and the power of art to transcend sorrow in the distance. The lanterns under the willows swung like silent sentinels, whispering of midnight joys and broken promises. Yet tonight, they bore witness to something more enduring, the light of memory, unextinguished by death, shining softly in the heart of Thistlebank School. And in that gentle glow, Holophonic spirit found its true home. Chapter 9. The Exhibition of Light and Shadow. Morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn as students and staff gathered in the lecture hall for the exhibition of Holophonics work. Rows of chairs faced a simple dais, draped in ivory cloth. upon which stood easels displaying her paintings and, beside each, framed pages of her poem, freshly printed and bound. The walls were hung with additional student pieces, each credited as a response to Olive's style: ghostly willows, fractured sundials, solitary figures in twilight hues. The hall smelled of polished wood and fresh ink. Miss Marple stood by the entrance, welcoming curious visitors with her gentle smile. Inspector Harrow lingered near the back, clipboard in hand, but his gaze softened as he watched the pupils pride in their tributes. On the dais, Charlotte Penn fidgeted with her notes. She was to recite Olive's third stanza before the assembled crowd moved to readings of later reconstructions. Miss Caldwell hovered nearby, discreetly dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief dot. At precisely 10 o'clock, Headmistress Bathurst ascended the dais, rapping lightly on a brass bell to call the hall to attention. The audience hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning," she began, voice steady but warm. "We gather not only to mourn, but to celebrate the life and talent of Olive Fenwick. Through her art and her words, she inspired us to look beyond the ordinary. Today's exhibition and readings honor her spirit and remind us that beauty and truth endure, even in sorrow." A ripple of applause followed, and Charlotte Penn stepped forward. Her cheeks glowed, though her voice did not tremble when she spoke. "I am Charlotte Penn," she began, glancing at the framed stanzas beside her. "Olive entrusted me with her verses. Though the final lines were stolen, I wish to share what she wrote herself." She unfolded her paper and cleared her throat. Stanza 1. And as she spoke, each line seemed to hang in the air, resonating with quiet power, until at last she reached the end of the third stanza. The hall was so still that the soft creak of chairs sounded like thunder. When Charlotte finished, it was a moment of stillness, then grateful applause, followed by spontaneous murmurs of appreciation. Miss Marple caught Charlotte's eye and offered an encouraging nod before stepping to the side to allow the next reader, a fourth form student, to take her place. Throughout the morning, the program continued, readings by students interspersed with reflections from Miss Caldwell on Olive's artistic journey and from Mr. Teal on the care taken to preserve her writings. Inspector Harrow spoke last, acknowledging the courage of those who came forward with evidence and expressing gratitude to Miss Marple for her insight. Then, as the final reading concluded, the audience was invited to view the paintings up close. Miss Marple drifted among the displays, her keen eyes noting how each studenta, shy freshman, an eager fifth former, had internalized Olive's aesthetic. One painting, by a first-year girl named Ada Thompson, depicted a broken clock face half submerged in a pool, the water reflecting a single willow branch. Another, by a senior prefect, captured the exact palette of Olive's midnight vigil. I transposed the figure into a misty woodland. The choices of color and composition revealed each young artist's understanding of loss and memory. At the far end of the hall, Penelope Graves stood beside the printing press roller and paper fragments, now dusted with conservation powder and framed behind glass. She waited as visitors paused to study the artifacts, reading the brief label that explained their role in the investigation. When a small knot of teachers approached, I greeted them with courteous professionalism. I never imagined my drama workshop would play such a part in. Her voice caught, and one of her colleagues placed a hand on her shoulder. Penelope nodded and managed a small smile. Nearby, Liam Wilcox offered help to students who had questions, speaking quietly and kindly. Both had borne witness to tragedy and its aftermath, and both had played their unexpected parts in uncovering the truth. Miss Marple returned to stand beside Inspector Harrow. "The exhibition is a fitting tribute," she commented. "Olive's influence will now echo through every stroke and word here." Harrow followed her gaze. "Indeed, and perhaps this celebration will help the school put the events of the past fortnight behind them." He hesitated. "There is one matter. We have not yet closed. Miss Marple tilted her head. Olive's final verses. Harrow nodded. I believe you mentioned we might reconstruct them. Have you plans for that? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Yes, Charlotte and I have begun weaving together what fragments remained, drawing upon Olive's translations of Ovid and her own imagery. I propose we commission a local printer to set the full poem in, publish it alongside an illustrated portfolio of her art. Harrow smiled. That would be a memorial beyond these walls, and it would give Olive's family a tangible legacy. She dipped her head. Exactly. But there is someone else I wish to involve. Harrow arched an eyebrow. Who might that be? A certain classics tutor who knows the nuances of Latin better than anyone. They shared a brief look, and then moved toward the dais, where Gabriel Chantry watched pensively as a group of students admired his annotated score of Midnight Sonata. When he saw them approach, he set the sheet music aside and came forward. Inspector, he said quietly. Miss Marple. His gaze shifted to the paintings before him. I wanted to thank you for including my suggestions in the exhibition, and for your patience with me. Miss Marple inclined her head. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Chantry. Your translations of Olive's Latin notes, those you discovered in her journal, will be invaluable in reconstructing her poem. Chantry's eyes reflected a mixture of gratitude and lingering sorrow. I only wish I had been more mindful of her safety. But if I can help preserve her voice now, it will mean a great deal. Inspector Harrow stepped forward. Then let us arrange a meeting with the printer. I will ensure the necessary funds and permissions are granted. Chantry nodded, relief softening his features. Thank you. Miss Marple touched his arm briefly. It is fitting that those who loved Olive, be they friends, teachers, or students, join in this final act of creation. She gestured to the hall around them, alive with color and remembrance. In doing so, we transformed tragedy into beauty. That afternoon, as the exhibition wound down, students were allowed to mingle freely, discussing their own work and praising one another. The headmistress circulated among them, offering words of encouragement. Miss Marple lingered by Olive's central painting, Midnight Vigil, while Inspector Harrow conversed quietly with Penelope Graves about the precise date of the posthumous publication. A sudden hush fell when Charlotte Penn stepped into the center of the hall, manuscript in hand. Excuse me, she began, voice clear and steady. I have something I'd like to share in addition to the poem. She unfolded the manuscript pages and read aloud a newly composed stanza beneath. The willow's silver tears, we pledged our hearts in silent song, yet shadows sought to blind our truth and left the night bereft and long. But from this broken hour shall spring a dawn unbound by fear or pain, for art endures beyond the grave, and love will bloom in memory's rain. As she finished, the hall was silent for a heartbeat. Then the applause that followed was heartfelt and unrestrained. Many faces glistened with tears. Damn, Olive's own painting seemed to glow in response. Miss Marple felt a quiet thrill of satisfaction. Charlotte's words, though born of loss, captured the very essence of Olive's creativity and courage. She glanced at Inspector Harrow, whose own eyes betrayed his pride in the young poet. Later, the last guest had departed, and the lecture hall was darkening. Miss Marple and Harrow walked together across the courtyard. Lanterns were being taken down, and the faint scent of fallen leaves drifted through the air. Thank you, Jane, Harrow said softly. Your guidance has brought closure and something more, a rebirth of beauty. She smiled. Olive would have approved. She believed that art and words could transcend even the deepest sorrow. They paused by the sundial memorial in the walled garden, where a single lantern still flickered at the sundial's base. Miss Marple placed her hand on a cool stone. Time may fracture lives, Inspector, but it also heals them if we tend the wounds with compassion. Harrow nodded. Sky, then let us lead this place to its peace and ensure that Olive Phoenix light continues to shine. Together, they turned toward the glowing windows of Thistlebank School, where laughter and soft conversation now echoed in affirmation that amid shadow, the human spirit endures. Chapter 10. Dawn of New Beginnings. The first light of morning spilled over the rolling Somerset hills as Miss Marple made her way along the dew-drenched path that led from the walled garden toward the main buildings of Thistlebank School. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of wet grass and the faint warmth of embers from the night's lanterns. All was calm at last, no hurried footsteps on the gravel, no whispers in shadowed corners, only the soft rustle of willow leaves and the distant chime of the school bell calling pupils to breakfast. Miss Marple paused at the edge of the garden, her gaze lingering on the sundial memorial. The plaque, freshly polished, caught the sun's rays, and a solitary white rose lay at its base, placed there by a student after the evening's reading. She smiled to herself. In the days since Olive Phoenix's tragic death, that silent circle beneath the willows had become a place of remembrance, but also of renewal. Each student who came to leave a flower had, in a small way, breathed life back into the school's spirit. As she stepped away, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Charlotte Penn hurrying down the garden path, the bound volume of Olive's complete poem clutched to her chest. "Miss Marple," Charlotte called softly. "I've been looking for you." Miss Marple beckoned her forward. "Good morning, Charlotte. I was just thinking of you. How does the volume look?" Charlotte opened the book reverently. "It's beautiful. We printed only 200 copies, one for the family, one for the library, and the rest for the school archive and for each member of the carnival committee." She turned a page. "The last stanza you helped me draft. It feels right." Miss Marple placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "Your words gave Olive's voice the final flourish it deserved. You've done her proud." They walked together toward the courtyard, where students in neat uniforms collected about the steps of the main hall. Inspector Harrow stood among them, engaged in animated conversation with Miss Caldwell and Mr. Teal on a table nearby. Copies of Olive's poem lay in neat stacks beside an array of her charcoal sketches and landscape studies. Each student who wished could take one as a keepsake. "Inspector," Miss Marple called, drawing Harrow's attention. He smiled warmly and approached Charlotte at his side. "Jane," he greeted, "thank you for bringing Charlotte here. The students are eager to begin distributing the copies." Miss Marple nodded. They seemed to embrace this memorial wholeheartedly. Harboring concern beneath his practice.com, Harrow asked, "Shall we present the first copy to the headmistress before we let the students proceed?" Charlotte's eyes shone with excitement. "Yes, Mrs. Bathurst will want to see it." They made their way into the headmistress's study, where Eleanor Bathurst stood beside a tall window overlooking the courtyard. She looked up as they entered, her expression a blend of pride and lingering sorrow. "Headmistress," Miss Marple said gently, "we have the first bound copy of Olive's poem, complete at last. Charlotte and I thought you should receive it before anyone else." Eleanor reached out with trembling hands to take the book. She ran her fingers over the embossed title verses beneath the willows and opened to the dedication page, "In loving memory of Olive Fenwick's art and spirit transcend the shadows of grief." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "This will be treasured." Then, turning to Charlotte, she added, "You have done a remarkable thing, dear. Olive would have been so proud of your devotion." Charlotte blushed and offered a shy smile. "She inspired me. I only tried to honor her." Eleanor closed the book and pressed it to her heart. "We will display this prominently in the library alongside her paintings, and I will arrange for the bursar to commission a permanent memorial bench beneath the willow grove, carved with her name in the opening lines of her poem." Miss Marple's heart warmed. a fitting tribute, headmistress. And with the poem in the hands of the students, they carry Olive's legacy forward in their memories. After a moment, Charlotte excused herself to join her classmates in the courtyard. Harrow and Miss Marple lingered. Inspector Harrow offered his congratulations. Another piece of closure, Jane. Thank you. Miss Marple inclined her head. Closure. Yes, but also a new chapter. The students have transformed grief into creativity. That is the truest healing of all. He glanced toward the window. And what of Miss Graves and Mr. Wilcox? Miss Marple's expression grew serious. They remain on administrative leave for the time being, though I understand they have both expressed deep remorse. The headmistress will decide their futures in due course. Harrow sighed. Tragic all around, none more so than for Alice Waterhouse. Such devotion turned to despair. Miss Marple laid a comforting hand on his arm. Her arrest was necessary for justice, but it does not diminish her lifelong service. Perhaps in time we may see that her final act was born of fear as much as fury. He nodded, then offered a wry smile. Well, let us leave darker reflections for another day. Today is for light. They joined the milling students in the courtyard. Just as the first distribution began, girls clustered around the table, each taking a copy of the poem and a sketch. They formed small groups, reading lines aloud, sharing their thoughts, and pointing to the words that touched them most. The liveliness of their voices rang clear, a joyful counterpoint to the silence that had reigned only days before. Miss Marple watched with satisfaction as Charlotte led a circle of younger pupils in reading stanza for the one she had composed, and their voices rose together in unison. Then another group admired the charcoal sketch of the broken sundial, marveling at the interplay of light and shadow Olive had captured. Inspector Harrow joined her at her side. Look at them, he said. They've found hope in the very words that once marked a tragedy. Miss Marple smiled. Art has that power. It turns sorrow into beauty, and in doing so reminds us what it means to be alive. They strolled through the courtyard, greeting students and offering quiet encouragement. Even the headmistress emerged. To watch her countenance softened, as though herself renewed by the scene. Later, as the morning sun climbed higher, a gentle bell tolled, signaling the start of classes. Students filtered away, clutching their copies and sketches. Their chatter animated with plans to discuss the exhibition and the poem in English and Latin lessons. Miss Marple and Harrow found themselves alone once more by the sundial. The white rose remained, now accompanied by two more, one pale pink, one lavender. Sunlight danced upon the plaques and petals. Shall we? Harrow asked, nodding toward the school entrance. Miss Marple took one last look at the memorial. Yes, our work here is done for now, but Thistlebank School has learned much about compassion, about the consequences of secrecy, and about the redemptive power of art. She turned to Harrow. Thank you for your steadfast partnership. Suspect we shall meet again, but let us allow this place to rest in peace. He smiled. Until then, Jane. They walked side by side toward the main hall, where the bustle of school life resumed its steady rhythm. In the distance, beneath the arches and corridors, lessons commenced, voices rose, and on classroom walls, Olive's paintings gazed out at new eyes forever, a testament to her vision. And as the sun bathed Thistlebank School in its golden morning glow, a sense of promise unfurled across the campus, a promise that, though the tragedies of yesterday remain etched in memory, the dawn of today carries the seed of renewal. Under that promise, Miss Marple and Inspector Harrow stepped forward into the vibrant tapestry of life that awaited them, ever mindful that in every ending lies the quiet stirrings of a new beginning.